This is the Wing Woman Show. Are you ready? You're listening to the Wing Woman Show. Today's guest, we are back again in the author sphere of things with a freelance book designer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan, for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, so walk us back to the very beginning of your journey and how you got into freelancing in the book world.
You know, I honestly think that my start came in kindergarten.
Really?
I won a contest and my prize was I got to go into a bookstore and choose any book that I wanted. And honestly, it was one of like my peak life experiences. And it was,
Oh
my
gosh.
gosh, it was such an exciting moment for me. But to be honest, like books have always been hugely important in my life. And I feel like I was always sort of destined to have a career that was somehow linked to books, like writing,
Yeah.
designing. But my first professional experience with a printed and bound book was when I was working for the University of British Columbia, and we were making the student calendar. So, and that's a huge collaborative team
Right.
effort, including like it's hundreds of pages and there's 10, like I don't know how many thousands of books get printed, but it's a really significant project, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of team members, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of content, the cover's a big deal. So that was my introduction to professional book
Mm-hmm.
creation. But for me, just being a part of the process of transforming people's ideas into a book is so exciting and so cool, and
Yeah.
it's so accessible now. So I love what I do.
Right. So what is that process like? So you talk about like how exciting it is to take someone's ideas and transform them into a book. And we've had a lot of other guests come on and talk about different aspects of the publishing process. But I would love to get your take on it for the self-publishing realm of things, because I think for a
Mhm.
lot of our listeners, that's a very good option for them.
Yeah, completely. And you know what, it's so, at this point I find it so fascinating because it's such a unique journey. Each book is such a unique journey depending on the author's goals and what their skills are and what their values are and what their budget is. So there's all these things that come into
Right.
play with it. And it's such a do-it-yourself journey, and big it's such a big process. I mean, there's so many steps
Mm-hmm.
along the process. So it really is so unique. So I think it's maybe clear what the basic overview is. You're doing the
Right.
writing and the editing and the proofreading, then you're moving to design and formatting, and then you're going to choose how you're going to sell it, whether or not you're going to print it, and then comes all the promotion, the publicity, and the book launch, and beyond, and finding ways to get it into the hands of people who will benefit from it and enjoy
Mm-hmm.
it. And there's definitely some overlap with all these steps, but importantly, I think they should all be connected. So
Right.
when I'm working with a client, I ask them what their goals are and I work backwards from that. So I'm not always involved with the writing and the editing and the
Right.
proofreading, but I kind of am put in the middle of that process. And so I will always want to find out, because I mean, there's some people who really they want to be on the bestseller list and that is their goal. Or there's people
Mm-hmm.
with different goals completely. There's some people that are just happy to have one book published, or or it's a personal development kind of process for them, and they're just so satisfied to get through and publish it. So that
Right.
people's really goals and their values, whether they even want a paperback, it's so different from project to
Mm-hmm.
project. So I have a client right now, and she told me her original goal for her book was to sell 100 books. That for her when she was starting the journey would have been a success. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think now she will very likely sell quite a bit more than 100 books.
That's
Her,
great.
yeah, her book is connected to her business. So that's the other thing, is if it's a dream, a sort of a dreamy project of fiction, then that's maybe different than if you have it connected to your business. And she's a coach, and so it's a different kind of
Right.
process,
So
right?
it's
It's different.
different for each individual industry, and then even further into what that book really means for them, and if it incorporates aspects of their business or if it's just a passion project.
Yeah, totally, right? Like people are
So,
gonna,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So what parts of the book design process do you work with? Because I know we talked about cover design, but I know that you do the inside formatting. You have a little bit of editing experience too, I think you
Yeah.
said. So what
Yeah.
kind of services are you able to support with?
Yeah, so I think of the book, I think people really, like, this goes back to my comment about there being overlap with the different steps. Like for me, the book cover is a really key piece of marketing of the book
Mm-hmm.
because it's the first thing people see. People have just a couple seconds
Right.
to get a feeling for what is this book about? Does this pique my curiosity? So it's a really it's like kind of a miniature poster that people just very quickly have to
Right.
grab onto. But working backwards from that to have a really great cover, the book has to have a great title. So I often come into the process and help people massage some of these. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
have a working title. Often they'll have a working title in play, and sometimes it needs to be refined further in order for the book cover to be amazing.
Right.
So we have to kind of go back and forth with working on the cover, for example, because that has to create curiosity, and so does the title. So the title and the cover really work together, like really closely,
Yeah.
especially in nonfiction, because if you have in nonfiction, the trend is really to have something kind of clever and the design matches with the cleverness. I guess it's part of the idea of wanting to make people curious,
Mm-hmm.
like find out first of all, get oriented to like, oh, I see this is a nonfiction book and I see that it's a subject that I'm interested in. And now I'm curious to learn more and click on that thumbnail to see what the subtitle is, because maybe you can't read
Right.
the subtitle, which is fine. So I really see the cover design as being so key to some of the other parts of the process, and in marketing too, because I always encourage authors to have a strong quote, especially for
Mm-hmm.
nonfiction, on the cover, which just looks
Okay,
extra
so a
professional.
quote on
Yeah,
the cover.
yeah.
See,
In order
those are
to
good tips.
yeah, in order to get that though, you have to kind of work backwards. You have to have sent out advanced review copies, which your designer can help you with, but you just have to think it through, right?
Right.
From the end goal. So if you want to have a cover that looks really amazing, super professional, like it could be in sitting on the
Right.
shelf at Barnes and Nobles, then
Mm-hmm.
you work backwards and all the little details really add up to that impression of professionalism. So I think one mistake that authors make is to underestimate how important all those little tiny details really are. And I would guess that 90% of authors, and maybe people in general, think that the cover is just sort of a slap the text on a picture, add
Right.
the author's name. And that's not what it is. That's really not what it is. It's hard to really explain what it is, but the best way to explain sometimes what it is when it goes terribly wrong, because then you can be
Mm-hmm.
like, you can laugh and you can say, oh, that looks ridiculous, you can't even read the title because the font's so wrong. Like font is really an
Right.
area where when someone's trying to do it themselves and they're under, I mean, that's great when people, I love all my resourceful authors that want to, I mean, design is a wonderful thing to do, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
depending on your goals. It might not matter that much to you. You might just want it to be a creative project, your cover, and that's
Right.
fine too, right? So I'm not trying to slam anybody that's doing it
No,
themselves at
no,
all,
right.
right? But it's the little things like the fonts and just the small details that really make it go to that higher standard if that's what you're aspiring to.
Yeah, and I think even in my experience, we did a book launch with a book where the cover kind of told a story that was different than what was in the book, a completely different genre. So when we were sending out for reviews, advanced reader reviews, we were getting bad reviews back because we kind of
Yeah.
give them that false hope of a different
Yeah,
story. So
totally.
it's
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the cover a
Yeah.
little bit more. So you
Yeah.
mentioned having advanced reader reviews on the cover, like a small quote. What are some other elements that you always put in your book cover designs?
Well, what I spend a lot of time is the typography, and typography it's a very subtle thing, and it's usually when it's not done well that you
Mhm.
notice it at all. See, what I notice is that when covers are really simple, like if you look at, for example, Seth Godin's, any of his books, right? The
Yeah.
covers, they look so effortless, they look so easy, they look so clever that it's easy to think that that's just, oh, that's a simple cover. I could do that in my sleep. It's kind of like abstract art. Like, okay,
Mhm.
you think your child could do that because it looks so easy, but then you try to do it yourself and you realize like, oh, like
Right.
this is not so it's the best design in general, the the more effortless it looks, probably the longer it took to create that, because
Mhm.
it's a harmony of like the title and the type and even the size of the author's name and it's all the design elements, it's the alignment, it's the proximity, it's like all the basics. Like if you Google I mean, design's wonderful. If you just
Right.
Google elements of design, you're going to learn all these, like if things are aligned in a certain way, it creates um, a certain kind of feeling, right? So
Right.
a design creates a feeling, just like art creates a feeling. I mean, they're totally different, but design, and if that's, and you need to have the right feeling if for that book. So
Right.
it's actually very complex. And so sorry, I forget your question. I got so,
No, that's great. Yeah. So just certain elements on the book cover. So you said the quote, just making sure it like communicates that feeling,
yeah,
which is important too. I
yeah,
feel like
yeah,
that's the most important part that is difficult for non-designers and even designers to do for themselves to
yeah,
create that feeling
yeah,
for a book they've written.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so are there any other elements that you recommend on the book cover?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you what I do for myself and what I tell all my clients if we're going to work together. Even if I'm doing the cover for them, this is what this is something mandatory for my clients to do. They have to go and they do have to find 3 or 4 book covers that are in their genre, that are books that they could imagine their book being next to in the
Mm-hmm.
bookstore, and spend a little bit of time adjusting your brain and your eyeballs to how those books look so that it's going to fit in. So, I mean, design is a wonderful thing. So I saw a book cover on a Facebook group the other day, and it was for a sci-fi vampire book or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was fantastical, but it was not matching with how it needed to look in order
Right.
to convey professionalism and to help the author understand, or the potential readers to understand, this is a book that I will want to investigate further.
Right.
So yeah.
So what surprises your clients the most with the overall design process or the editing process,
Yeah,
would you say?
yeah. So this research phase, the author, like for example, one of my current clients, she had done a fair amount of research. She had looked at other books in her genre. She had found some that she really liked. In fact, she was being quite specific. She's like, I want to try this layout, right? So I was like,
Mhm.
sure. So I always provide 3 mock-ups that are very, very different, like 3 totally different mock-ups, so that authors can, first of all, have that first impression sensation of like it's kind of a surprise. You want to surprise, so
Right.
often they're like really surprised and really delighted by how far you can take a design idea. So I had created one that was similar to the one that she really liked, and it was okay. This is often what happens. But then when I'm playing around and trying different things, then I come up with something that's like surprising. And so that's what you, if you're going to reach for a book, it's good if it's surprising and clever and delightful, right? So that's sort of like the ultimate, something where
Right.
the title is really great and the cover is delightful and readable and clear, and you can tell what genre it's in, and the typography works and everything. So that's for me the highlight of my whole job, is when I send clients cover mock-ups and there's something that really
Yeah.
surprises them and delights them. So that for me is the ultimate. And then that's what you need for the reader as well, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
and
That's
it's,
so true.
yeah, and it's really a first impression thing too, right? If you think about it, like if you can't quite read, this is the biggest mistake the worst mistake, not the biggest, the worst mistake that I see ever with a self-published book cover, is that you can't read the title properly because it's not enough contrast or something
Mm.
like that. Like say you see a blue cover with a purple title, like, and you
Right.
can't really read it, right? Then person's not gonna stop and open it up and check and try to figure out, they're just gonna move on, right? So if
Right.
something's just not really working design wise, they're not going to check it out. They're not going to buy
Right.
it. So it's going to create a friction for sales, and they're going to move on to the next book that they can read, right? So it's these
Right.
very basic, mandatory design elements for the cover, like readable.
Yeah, right. Well, it's all those little details that add up to make the big impact where they actually are able to open the book, buy the book,
Yeah,
and connect with your bigger brand too.
yeah, yeah.
So let's go back to the title because I'm really curious because I know that you probably see so many different book titles on a daily basis. Could you give us an example of maybe a book title that didn't really have that ring to it and what you looked for and how you narrowed it down to a really catchy title?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I have, even for books that I write for myself, there's a lot of different variables that are important. Like, for example, you want your book working backwards again. If you're going to post it on somewhere like Amazon and you want people to be able to discover it, you need to make sure that you include some of the keywords that people would search for your book.
Right.
So like right now, okay, I'll use a project that I'm working on as an example, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, it's called, it's a working title. So I'm fully aware that this is not a good title. So this is for my own. So I haven't gotten to the point where I'm like really happy with the title, but it's called The Fun of Launching Your Book for Shy Authors. So it's got the keywords. You like it? Okay. So it's got the keywords that someone that wants to launch their book would have. It's got the word author in it. It's got launching. It's got book. So it's good. So I might massage it a little bit more to make it more delightful or surprising, or I might just, it's kind of just descriptive, you know, a lot of people, and that's fine. That can be really fine. Like you might not move on to the, you might just, this is the other thing about self-publishing, is that sometimes you're doing your best and you're learning as you go, and maybe your next book title is just going to be more clever and more better, right? You don't have to, like, if you're going to seek perfection, then you're not going to get things moving forward, right? So that's the thing. So there's all kinds of self-publishing books that are flooding into the marketplace that haven't gone through those traditional filters, right? They're just, here they are. There's like a whole ocean of these books. And so some of them are hitting that high professional traditional publisher mark, and some of them are down here, but in any case, some of them are being discovered and some of them are being read and loved and some not as much. But from the author's point of view, it's forward momentum, right?
So something that's very searchable, but it just depends on, so what I'm kind of taking for it is it depends on your goals. So if, let's say that an author's goal was to kind of make this a bigger income stream of theirs on Amazon, maybe. So would you recommend having something that's really searchable for that?
Definitely. It's always a good idea to have for the title or for in general. Yeah,
for
definitely.
The title,
yeah. So you would want to do the research and find out what other books that people are discovering. Like I would look at the top 100 books that are similar to what you're writing. And find out what keywords are being used, what's being found. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You have to make sure that some of those words are in your title. Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so what has been maybe your favorite book that you've worked on, a client of yours?
Well, actually, currently I'm working on, I don't know if I should, I think I have to wait before I can talk about her book, but she is one of my, it is one of my favorite projects, because you know what she did, this is interesting, is she started her whole book journey with the title. She has such a great title that she worked from the title backwards. And so now we have the book design, and now she's working on, and the other thing is because she's a coach, she has an audience that she's been developing already. So she has people to launch the book too, which makes things, you know, I mean, obviously it's not mandatory because people are, depending on their goals, still self-publishing their books without any audience and then working on that moving forward. But if you have an audience to begin with, then that's a wonderful thing if you're launching a book. So she's just, it's a delightful book, and it's such a, oh, it's just such an amazing accomplishment. Like, oh my gosh, so you work with people who are launching their books. Well, they've written a book and they've gone through all these steps, and they've, you know, and this is their accomplishment. And yes, of course, they'll learn from everything that they learned, and their next book will be that much better, right? But it's just so cool to see so many people just taking the project and just doing it, you know. They're not like, oh, I have to wait till someone says that I'm good enough. They're just like, I have actually, you know what, I have a new client, and she was traditionally published, and now she's deciding to self-publish. So it works. There's still, I mean, I think there's still kind of a negative stigma around self-publishing to some degree, but the advantages are undeniable. And there are people who are taking also, it's not new. I just read recently that Virginia Woolf, Walt Whitman, some of these people, they self-published like way back. Right. They didn't wait for someone to say, oh, you're good enough, your writing's good enough. They just did it. Right. So I think that's good perspective to keep in mind too. It's not brand new, but I mean, it's very accessible. And
I would say that's the most exciting part for me too, working on a book launch, is that they've spent months editing, writing, figuring out which ideas they want to include in the book. And like, it's a very emotional process too, especially if it's a book talking about your story and your own experience. So to be able to take that and launch it is like such an exciting process. And I'm sure you feel the same when
Yeah.
everything starts to connect, because just from hearing you talk, like it just shows how much you pay attention to those small details. So
Hmm.
when you see all those details come together, I'm sure
Hmm.
that's so satisfying for you.
Yeah, it is so satisfying. It's true. And then it's just, it really is. Yeah.
Well, that's great. So thank you so much just for sharing all your book wisdom.
Thank you.
Where can people connect with you online? Do you have a website that we can shoot our audience towards?
Yes, I do have a website. It's a-schmidt.com, Schmidt.